Hello and welcome to This is Just Ross and Chris. We are talking about buy-to-let investment selling tenanted properties across the whole of the UK. And this is being recorded on Friday, the 3rd of May at 11:14 a.m. And I say that because we are going to be talking about the changes that are happening and have happened in Scottish politics and how that may or may not affect Scottish housing policy. And I'm going to steal this from Ross because it's a good one to lead with. That since 2020 and right up until 2026, Scottish housing has basically been, certainly in the private renter sector, has been governed with non-stop emergency, temporary legislation that has created an environment of, uncertainty, to put it mildly. And there doesn't seem to be any plan that's really been ratified yet, or nobody quite knows what's going to happen. It's just always, we don't know what's going to happen. That's been the phrase, what is going to happen? This is what it is now, but that will change in 6 months, or will it change? And it's gone on like that for so long. It's not just all a bit of moan. But where are we just now, Ross? What's the latest political development in the last 48 hours?
Yeah, well, it looks like from where we are at the moment that John Swinney will be unopposed as the next leader of the SNP and the next First Minister of Scotland. Obviously, it's open until 12 o'clock on Monday, so we're recording this, as I said, on Friday. Something might happen over the weekend. It looks highly unlikely because everybody right across the party seems to be now supporting John Swinney. So he'll be going in, leading a minority government going forward. So they had the SNP and the Greens had this agreement, Butte House agreement, in place since 2021, where they were working together on lots of various things that, lots of things that got quite a bit negative feedback on. And going forward, John Swinney will be running a minority government. So there's a lot of legislation that impacts landlords, like you just discussed, the Housing Scotland Bill, EPCs, the build to rent sector. These are all sort of, people will be wondering what's going to happen in the next few years. So it looks like the minority government will be working with different parties to try and get stuff through. So it looks like they'll still be working with the Greens, but in a sort of more informal relationship when the policies suit both parties to come together.
Yep. And on the Housing Scotland bill, there's a few parts in there that I find particularly really interesting. One of them being I want to say rent pressure zones, but that's not it. It's rent control areas, RCAs. I didn't even have to look down. I just knew from memory, RCAs. And I had a catch up with somebody in lettings yesterday, and we were really just having a good chat about it all. That some of the, they can set a limit. This is the most that you can charge rent wise for size of property in a certain location. I guess that's how it works. And there will be continuation of, you can only increase the rent by X amount every 12 months. And I don't know if they'll still use the same system that they're using just now. But what is different is that you're not able to increase the rent even when the property's empty. So a tenant moves out and then you remarket the property, you're unable, potentially it's not been signed off yet and won't be signed off until May some point in 2026, which is the same year as the next Scottish election. But it's, you're unable to put the rent at whatever the market rent is, unless of course that market rent is within, say, 10% or whatever the limitation is of rent increases. And also as long as you haven't increased the rent in the last 12 months. It's just that kind of it's that new bit of legislation that controls what happens when the property's empty. It's no longer just about existing tenancies. It's going to cover when the property becomes empty. So anyway, just on that.
Yeah, that's right. And it'll be up to the local authorities. They'll have a duty to continually monitor. I think it might be every 3 or 5 years, continually monitor their own areas to check to see where there is
Yeah.
pressure on rents.
But I believe they
So
don't make the
what
decision, though. I believe they collect the information and give it to the Scottish government, who then make that decision.
I don't know what the
Yeah,
mechanics of the
I
decision-making
think
process is, but
yeah,
at the moment, they're not. There's a lack of data. There's always been this lack of data around. So
yeah.
there would have to be a new system in place to record the data on rentals, either active tenancies or properties that come back onto the market and our new tenants are secured.
Right. Let's say it's Swinney that is the only candidate, and he becomes the new leader of the SNP and the new First Minister. So, do you think this is going to be slightly better, the same, or slightly worse? Because I don't think it's going to be massive change. Do you think it's going to be the same, slightly better, or slightly worse for Scottish landlords in the private rented sector, and maybe for build to rent as well?
Difficult to say, isn't it? His launch speech, he seemed to indicate that he was focusing on business and trying to get the economy working
Yeah.
and generating
It's
more prosperity for
it's the
Scotland.
lack of inward investment in Scottish economy is really evident, isn't it?
So I think having a buoyant property market and trying to get on top of the housing crisis is fairly key. I just don't think that continually hammering landlords the way they've done over the last few years. And I think most people think that that's been more of an agenda for the Greens than the SNP. But the SNP have played their part. So I think there's maybe I hope there's a reset, a change of approach towards landlords. Landlords are supplying properties. There's a lack of properties, not only rental properties, but actually properties to buy, social housing, purpose-built student accommodation. So the landlords have to be seen as the solution, part of the solution to the housing
Yeah.
crisis. So there has to be this reset, and hopefully there's a change in approach to how the housing minister will speak to the landlord bodies going forward, because of the relationship the Greens have now. There won't be the tenants' rights minister. What was Patrick Harvey? He was the
Yeah.
minister for tenants' rights. It won't be that type of vibe around anymore. There'll be maybe more of a sort of acknowledgement that yes, there's a housing crisis. Landlords are there to provide good quality accommodation, as well as the Scottish government need to step up their game to support that with other parts of the housing sector.
Yeah, well, yeah, I sense a slight improvement in situation. I think that won't be night and day at all, but I think you've got it right there. I think you're saying that it's going to be slightly better, or potentially it's an opportunity for not quite a clean slate, because there's all the political kind of machinations that need to go on, and the art of the possible.
Yeah, so actually going back to the Housing Scotland Bill, the temporary legislation is in place that came into force on the 1st of April will continue until the 31st of March next year. There's actually legislation for that to continue for another 12 months. That takes us to 2026, where many people think that the new housing bill will come into force in 2026. So as you said at the start, that takes us to 6 years of temporary legislation that's been kicking about, which has impacted a lot of people. And a lot of people, landlords are thinking of selling, people not building purpose-built student accommodation or big blocks because they're worried about the how long the temporary legislation is going to be in force and what might be the permanent legislation that comes on the back of it. So it's not been helpful at all. And the fact that we're going to potentially get to 2026 is not great, and that coincides with a Scottish election and a possible change of government on the back of that. It just all feels a bit messy, doesn't it?
what a mess. I mean, we were trying to, well, I was having a look at sort of LinkedIn, people saying, what does this mean for us at the moment and going forward? Is things going to be better or worse? And I'll keep coming back to that question, but I think it is the question. Um, the housing bill, obviously, it's still at that stage. It's not been signed off. The devil will be in the detail.
Yeah.
You know,
And hopefully, some of the things that they were discussing earlier about the rent control areas or the capping of rents for current tenants and in between tenancies is going to be looked at, and it's just not viable going forward for a healthy, and the Scottish government want people to invest in the housing market. They want landlords. They want big, up till a few years ago, they really sort of courted big institutional landlords, people
yeah.
coming in and doing that build to rent sector, and now the build to rent sector is really pushing back on them, saying, this is not quite what we need from the Scottish government this time. There's a report by Savills recently that said that I think it said about 20,000 beds short for students, for purpose-built student accommodation in Glasgow, and there was just less than that short of beds for Edinburgh. So students are signing up for university courses not knowing whether they can get accommodation or not in the cities. And it's not great. And then we're losing these students. So rather than coming to Glasgow or coming to Edinburgh, they'll maybe look at other cities around the UK to see, well, where can we get accommodation and a good education? And that's to Scotland's detriment, really. They want the best students to stay in Scotland, to learn in Scotland and to get jobs in Scotland and to put money back into the Scottish economy.
Well, fingers crossed. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll learn more about where the direction of travel.
What we haven't discussed is EPCs. So that's
Yeah, I was
another
going
thing
to say
that's
about EPCs. Yeah, I mean, that's not part of the Housing Scotland bill, or
no,
separate
that's
to
separate.
that? And that's been put. That's again another example of no decision being made. It just keeps getting put back and put back. But for all properties that are let to be an EPC of C, it's just it's impractical. I don't know if there's been any new advice on how that actually is going to be done, or any dispensation for certain types of properties, or I think there is. We've heard some information about, well, if you produce an estimate and it's X amount, percentage wise, let's say it's a £20,000 bill to turn a 1 bedroom flat from a D to a C. You probably don't have to do that. I mean, I don't know, making up numbers and examples, but I mean, there's got to be some way of keeping these properties in lettings as long as they are not a complete disaster in terms of energy efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. They've been planning this for about 10 years,
Yeah.
about bringing in minimum standards. 10 years they've been planning this, and they've not been able to do it yet. And the latest was, I think it's at the moment there's a proposal for, let me get this right, proposals for all landlords to have an EPC of a band C by 2028 and owner occupiers to have a band C by 2033. But the cost, as you said, to make sure these properties comply and get to band C for some properties, it's just not practical. There's a famous example last week that made it into the papers about the Scottish government spending 3.5 million to decarbonise a building in Elgin that was worth 275,000. So they spent it was spent 13 times more than the value of the property, and they calculated that it would take 1,000 years to recoup the energy savings on the building, and that's nuts. But I'm not saying for every landlord they're going to be, well, is gas boilers, are they going to be chucked out? Is heat pumps, what's the cost of putting a heat pump in a property? How's it going to work? It's just it needs to be fully thought through before they come out with these things, because the
Well,
costs associated with it.
we've
It's
We've definitely talked about EPCs a couple of
A
times
lot. Yeah, yeah,
in the last couple of years. And this is more about kind of what's happening with regards to the political changes and how that's going to affect the policy going forward. But again, maybe with the Greens not being so involved, that is going to make things a bit more sort of more pragmatic approach to how this is going to be done. And just we just need some decision to be made really, and some framework around that. But and I'm hugely in favour of saving this planet, that's for sure. But it's got to be a practical solution.
it does. Yeah, we need positivity, and that's positivity for tenants.
And
No,
this
we need,
particular video is not it's not helping with the positivity, is it? We do need some though.
yeah, we do. We definitely need some. But yeah, we need some kind of plan to come out and say, listen, this is what we're going to do for tenants. The rent cap hasn't worked. There's lots of data out there. It just hasn't worked. It's not going to work long term. It's not working for tenants. What we've seen is the rent cap's come into place. Rents have gone up considerably as a result of the rent cap. So that has to be reviewed. It can't be something that stays long term. It's just going to impact and hurt tenants more and more. It's just the unintended consequences of their actions. Um,
I mean,
and I get
think,
it. I understand the Scottish Government want to look after tenants.
yeah, I think you're right that
Yeah,
rents
and
have gone up a little bit more than they would have, and that because of the rent cap, because landlords taking the opportunity to advertise properties at a much higher rent than they might have ordinarily to mitigate against the risk of future rent caps. But equally, I think, something that's contributed greatly to rent increases is the increase in interest rates as well. So landlords have basically had to increase rents whenever they
yeah,
get an opportunity. Because still speak to plenty of landlords who aren't really, you know, that, keen to increase rents, but many of them just have had to
yeah,
to stay in it. So it was a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm. Okay, is there anything else we want to? Because it's been like about a 50-minute video.
yeah.
Anything else?
Nobody's watching the rest of it. I
No.
was surprised about it yesterday.
There is nobody apart from maybe our most loyal follower. Uh, but if anyone out there still listening, that one person, if you have anything you'd like to say, get in contact with us. We'd be happy to talk and certainly hear your thoughts on how the political changes in Scotland are going to affect Scottish housing going forward. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching and listening. Bye bye.